saying that water is the most natural resource that is used in the world. It is the resource second to none that our lives depend on. And I just want to inform my statement by letting those in listening short of my voice know that there are 703 estimated persons worldwide who don't have access to clean water. That is 1 out of 11 persons in the world who suffer this fate. And if you want to expand it a little further, we have, as I speak, 2.2 billion persons living on the biosphere as we know it, the world, who don't have access to proper management facilities for drinking water. 2.2 billion persons in the world because of the lack of proper water facilities, non-water management facilities. They don't have access to drinking water. Now, these figures, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, can paint the picture, the dark and gloomy picture associated with persons, a lot of persons in this world who are caught with the idiosyncrasy of not having water available to be able to facilitate their basic needs. And this is real for a lot of persons. Persons in Africa, you oftentimes hear this story. Persons in the Caribbean, persons in Barbados. It is a phenomenon, unfortunately, that would not excite anybody in the third decade of the 21st century. Certainly not. And when we are talking about what happens in the mesosphere, what happens in Mars, and that we are sending spaceships all over the world, it is a damning shame to recognize that something as basic as water, something as basic as that which is seen as the most used resource, cannot be accessible to billions of people around the world. It's unfortunate. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have brought this bill in order to ensure, with proper management, that every single drop of H2O, water as we know it, that we can move it from our roofs to the reefs in a sustainable way. Because the whole definition of the word sustainable is infused in this type of project. And it speaks to how we are able, utilizing, of course, certain tenets. And these tenets were espoused by the Member of Parliament for St. Michael's East, when she spoke about the things that this legislation will certainly realize. She talked about creating flood zones and works and flood works. And the legislation spoke about the duties of owners and occupiers of land, duties of land developers, general prohibitions, enforcements, and obviously there was a category for miscellaneous activities. So it encompasses a gamut of activities that would ensure the sustainability of our water system and how we manage our stormwater. And I must say that for the purposes of our country, our stormwater usually comes from our rainfall, and how that rainfall is able then to be utilized whether in our aquifers or in our dams with a proper watershed program. That is the type of discussion, Mr. Speaker, that we are having. But the reality is that we are faced, and the importance of this legislation, I am the first to admit, because I don't need nobody to convince me, that we are faced with a bipolar climate change crisis. And the reason why I use the word bipolar is because by its nature, its adverse nature, I believe it is. And I make no apology by saying so, because one day you can have extreme heats. Last year we recorded, in the month of October 31st, 34.6 degrees Celsius. Never happened yet. 34.6 degrees Celsius. And the following days, we had rainfall that led to flooding, where there were recorded 3, sometimes 4 inches of rainfall in less than 4 hours of rain. That is why I say that is a bipolar climate crisis event called climate change. That's why I say so. Because on the one hand, there are extreme heats that are scorching in nature. I redefine the word global warming, and I'm bold enough to say that it is global scorching. And we have had days last year, prolonged days of global scorching. Some people may refer to it as the El Nino effect, where there's oscillations in the Pacific Ocean and interfering with the Atlantic. The weather, the climate change specialists will put all sorts of theories. But the reality that hits home for us Barbadians and those other small and developing states who contribute very little to this phenomenon, the reality is that in the next couple of days, and when there's rainfall, we have extreme cases of flooding. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we have sought to bring a bill to this Parliament that will ensure that all the actions are taken so that we can have a sustainable plan, a watershed plan for our stormwater management. And as I said, it speaks to a whole set of things. But what interests me, and I want to start out with, is Section 20, which spoke to the improper waste disposal and waste practices that will lead to obviously to garbage, debris, bulk waste pile up, and the effects that we see as it relates to the change of the natural course of our water. Illegal dumping, a scourge that has not only destroyed our ecosystems as we know it, but now, based on Section 20, it has an effect on the course of our water. And not only the course, but the quality as well. Because with illegal dumping, there is a sister that associates itself very closely with it, and that is pollution. And the fact that the remnants of this illegal activity, those remnants, the effect of those remnants as it relates to leaching into our water supply. This, Mr. Speaker, is the devil that we have to deal with on a daily basis in my ministry. And I'm saying that I want to congratulate the Member of Parliament for St. Michael South, St. Michael East, Southeast, who was bold enough to bring legislation that would say to persons who continue to dump illegally in our gullies and our ecosystem are disrupting the natural flow of our water, and also bring harmful chemicals into that same water, that you can now be charged $20,000 because on summary conviction, that is what this legislation has put in place. And I want to say that is a move in the right direction, along with the Health Services Bill, the Health Services Act, which speaks $35,000 if you are found dumping illegally or on the year imprisonment or on summary conviction up to 2 years imprisonment, that this is a step in the right direction. We, as a people, as a nation who is suffering from water scarcity and water shortage, should embrace this type of legislation, and equally, we should be responsible enough and be conscious enough not to be involved in the illegal and wanton behavior that we are seeing. We are currently conducting at the Gullies Are Alive project, aptly named, of course, by the gentleman who is standing a little higher than myself. Well, some may say a lot higher than myself, but my good friend from the constituency of St. Peter, who told me, Minister, you know something? Our Gullies are in Barbados. There are vibrant places, vibrant ecosystem. They have all the flora and fauna you talk about daily. But there are places that we have the watershed moments. There are places that we can have biodiversity that you speak about. That is so important in our climate change fight. That these places must now be given life. So equally, I think that this project should be called The Gullies Are Alive. And I want to say that we started the project in earnest last November, and we have so far collected tons and tons of garbage. The same garbage that Section 20 referred to. The bulk waste, the old fridges, the old washing machines, because when they start to disintegrate, all the harmful chemicals go into our water supply. And if they don't go into the water supply, immediately because of the permeability of our soil, they are washed along with other harmful remnants into the sea. That is why it's no small wonder that when we did the test with the university in association with the university, with our good friends in New Zealand, we found that in the Sargassum Sea, we had higher than normal levels of arsenic, cadmium, mercury, lead, and other harmful chemicals. Because the Sargassum was just sequestering that which already exists in the sea from water runoff. And that is why it's important to be able to come with a plan to manage our stormwater. It is real for us. We are regarded in this country as the 15th most water scarce country in the world. The 15th. This is not something that we should, by any stretch of imagination, be proud of. And if the climate change crisis continues in the way that it has been doing in terms of the trajectory, I will say that it is not a good sight. It is not a good omen for the people of Barbados. And so we have to be able to do the right thing. There's never a wrong time to do the right thing. And right now is the right time to ensure the success of a piece of legislation that will put measures in place so that persons will have the systems, the storm management infrastructure and systems to be able to preserve that water and allow us to have the drinking water, that clean drinking water that we feel and we know that the people of Barbados deserve. But it's not only about having built great technology and ensuring that there are the dams and the soakways, etc. But in this ministry, my responsibility is to also talk about green technologies and to have that green belt technology to ensure that we have a permeable membrane and a filtration membrane so that we can have clean water going to our aquifers, so we can redirect our water in a way that will ensure that the flooding that we will have in certain areas, that will become a thing of the past. If you can date your memory, Mr. Speaker, to a couple of years ago, we had flooding in the whole town in Trent's area. It was a perennial catastrophe in that area. And what we did in the Ministry of Environment, along with USAID, we decided to enter a project where we use green technology along with building those canals and et cetera, great technology that built infrastructure environment to be able to mitigate the flooding. And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, if you are any Barbadian during the heavy rainfall, happen to visit those areas, I'm sure that you will recognize that the project has been a successful project thus far using green technology because it allows the filtration and the movement of water in a safe way. The importance of having the adaptive measures, and when I say adaptation, a project comes directly to mind, the roofs to reefs. It speaks to every drop of water from the roof, and I'm saying it is high time that we start enhance our technologies, whether green or built, to be able to accommodate every single feature to preserve our water. It is having a holistic watershed exercise and project. And we now have to have the conversations even with Barbadians. I know you're accustomed to certain architecture and certain buildings. We are accustomed to building with rafters and truss anchors and connectors. We have been doing it for years. But it's high time now, in the same way that we are saying that some roofs, some areas of our roofs must have that photovoltaic as abatement technology so that we can reduce our fossil fuel picture. I am saying that we now have to start talking about having green roofs, where we are using green vegetation on our rooftops to be able to filter the water, allowing us to have an additional agriculture belt and agriculture means, along with having a filtration mechanism for our water. It is done in other places in the world, and I think that it is high time that we start introducing these things in Barbados because green roofs, along with green belt technology, and we are starting to get now the answer to having that watershed moment and that technology to be able to improve our stormwater management. And these are the conversations that we now have to start having because it is real for us. And all those who believe, as I said before, that climate change is just a misnomer, it is right in front of us every day. We feel it, we see it. We are having the storms, persons are complaining about allergies, and we have to now respond to these vagaries in a very, 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 very serious way. We have to have the technologies, whether green or gray, to be able to infuse what we do as a response to the climate change crisis. And so, even how we treat to our roof will depend on projects like this. They'll depend on projects like this. And the reefs, of course, because it is the movement of water from our roof, how we capture that water, whether it is damming techniques, because that has been shown to work in the agriculture belt. I know my minister, the Member of Parliament for St. Philip South, he exposes it on a daily basis, the fact that this has been able to conserve a lot of water where we can use in a natural way in our agriculture industry. And of course, what my good friend in Christchurch, West, is doing in terms of having the sewage treatment facilities to be able to put back water, because at the end of the day, we must be able to recharge. This is not the Barbados that we knew 50, 60 years ago. This is a Barbados who, like other states and lesser developed states, who is under the vagaries, unfortunately, of a climate change crisis, and we are going to do everything in our power. We are going to ensure that the legislation is here, but equally, we have to make sure that we walk Barbadians in the process, because every single hand must come together. There's a saying that many hands make light work. I said already, the antithesis of that is that no work makes light hands as well. And I'm serious when I say it. And I believe that we now have to put collectively our hands together every Barbadian must play their part, of course, in ensuring that at the household level that we do the basic things in terms of our softwares, in terms of our wells, report any blockages, and then ensure that the drainage unit will continue to do that which they're supposed to do. The legislation speaks to what is not allowed in terms of the building of fences, guard walls, structures, etc. The fact that you cannot block those passageways by vehicles, whether they're abandoned vehicles or otherwise, these are serious aspects of the legislation in order for us to be able to roll out a proper watershed, project. And I am saying, Mr. Speaker, sir, that, and the reason why I say that the most adaptive project that we ever deliver on this country will definitely be our roof to reefs, because you're not only looking at water from the time it leaves in a sustainable way, the roof, but equally we are looking at our reef and the ability to be able to recharge our reefs with good, clean water. And the importance of this should never be underestimated, because of the ability of our reefs to be able to provide that blue carbon sink for the sequestration of the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide as we know it. This is well documented. It is important. The roofs, from the roofs, and how we build those roofs, how we are able to use, Mr. Speaker, sir, the rafter connectors and truss anchors, how we are able to allow water to go into our storage tanks. You've heard the conversation at our budget. We spoke about the incentive plan to have homeowners conserve water, having those tanks on the house. All those things, Mr. Speaker, we are doing with one basic thing in mind, and that is to be able to conserve water so we can have it delivered in a sustainable way to the average Barbadian. And that is the basis of our plan. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am happy to associate myself with this legislation, and I want to tell the Member of Parliament for St. Michael's Southeast that the legislation is here. The work will now start. It is a matter of sensitizing Barbadians about the importance of having good, clean water, recognizing that billions of people around the world certainly don't, and that they must be able to walk in the journey with us as we are able to sustain that which will basically save their lives. I'm obliged.
Honourable for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to join this debate. First, at the outset, let me commend the Deputy Prime Minister for bringing this legislation to this honourable chamber. It has been a long time in coming, and certainly her presentation was certainly very explanatory, explaining clause by clause by clause each part of the legislation and the intention and what it is supposed to do. Let me at the outset, Mr. Speaker, give you a little story. There was once a lady who represented the city of Bridgetown. Her name was Dame Billy Miller. And those who don't know, Dame Billy is my cousin, and we would often have very informal discussions. And she once told me, even before I was minister, that whenever there is a heavy rainfall, she would head down to the Princess Alice area, the pumping station. And I never understood why she would head down to the Princess Alice pumping station. So one day she explained it to me. She said, Bridgetown is essentially underwater. You hear that? Bridgetown is essentially underwater. So that Princess Alice pumping station, what a lot of people don't know or understand, is if that Princess Alice pumping station does not pump the storm water out to sea when it is collected through those drains, you know, we even had one going through Harrison College. We used to call it the Dippy. Same drain, storm water drain. The storm water drain that goes through Chapman Lane, that starts in Baxter's Road, collects the water from Chapman Lane, takes it all the way down past Chauffette, past everything, out to Princess Alice, and then it's pumped out to the ocean. If that pumping station is not working effectively, when there is storm water, Bridgetown, Chapman Lane, Mason Hall Street, where I come from, where my mother came from, or where Dan Billy came from, and Reed Street, will flood. And that is the importance, and that is how our engineering from way back then understood the importance of stormwater management. Very, very important. I would not imagine that then, when I became Minister of Transport, which had drainage as part of it, when the hurricane that didn't have water, you remember that hurricane? I think Dorian, I think it was. I was stationed down there at Princess Alice to make sure that those pumps kicked in whenever the water came. Lo and behold, there was no water from Hurricane Dorian. But the experience of being there made me recognize how important that pumping station was, one. And two, we had to do things to make sure that that pumping station was strengthened. So when the last administration had left, you wouldn't believe, of the 3 pumps, they had only left 1 functioning pump at that pumping station. 1 pump to be able to protect all of Bridgetown from flooding. Well, this administration changed that. And we now have 3 functional pumps at Princess Alice Terminal. And I can go on further, Mr. Speaker, because I recognized that a pump ain't gonna work without electricity. And if the electricity went off at that time, none of those pumps would be working. And I made it my business when I was minister, not only to make sure that we had 3 pumps working to protect Bridgetown, but also we have, at that time for Dorian, we brought a generator. But then after Dorian, we had a generator, and there is a generator permanently stationed at the Princess Alice pumping station, so that even if there's a deluge and the electricity goes off, Bridgetown is protected. That is what planning is about, and that is what this Barbados Hill Party was able to provide for the people of Bridgetown. You know, I obviously had to speak in this debate for 2 reasons, 2 of many. But the first one, obviously, as a former Minister of Transport, when we were looking at storm drainage and protection and storm water management, I was very much involved in that. And then the second reason, because this relates a lot to planning, and now as Minister for Planning, I have responsibility there. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, that another thing that we were able to do for the people of the city was earlier in our tenure, they had not a hurricane, it was a heavy rainfall, and the people of Chapman Lane got flooded out. And it's a serious thing, because what that flooding did, it went into people's wells, and the water was 2 feet, 3 feet up. People were marooned in their homes, and it was difficult. And what we were able to do with the drainage unit, we made something called a floodplain. And what is that? This is a very technical thing. You heard the other technical member here, and the member for Christchurch West Central, speaking about it, because a lot of these things tend to be a little technical. It's a technical thing, but I can make it simple. What a floodplain is an area that is lower than the normal area that the water would settle in. So what that does is that draws the water from the people's houses, from the road that the people would need, into this area. It's almost like a sacrificial flood area. So we made a floodplain at Chapman Lane. So it meant then that any time that there was a high rainfall, rather than the houses and the roads flooded, the floodplain would flood, which was exactly what it was supposed to do. And then people say, but we ain't getting any flooding here, but we're flooding over here. But that's exactly what the floodplain was supposed to do. The floodplain is a sacrificial area The member for St. Lucie would remember when we were down there. We were down there day and night to make sure that we deepened this area that would take the water away from the houses and away from the road into this area, and then channel it to one of those channels back to the Princess Alice Terminal. And that's what the floodplain did. It was very successful, working up to this day. The only problem we get is sometimes the channel, the connection between the floodplain and the canal gets choked, and you have to go in and get that cleaned out. But that is what has protected. It was almost like a sacrificial area that has protected the houses and the roads from flooding in Chapman Lane. But I heard the minister, I heard the Deputy Prime Minister speak about people building on the wells. But when we went down there were whole houses built on the canal, Mr. Speaker. Whole houses were built on the canal. You remember, St. Lucie would recall. And we had now to then look to build houses so to move these people off the canal. Because what we did is we didn't only accept the canal that was there. We deepened and widened the canal, which meant that it took a greater volume of water so that the floodplain would clear faster, and also so that it would be able to take a larger volume of water. And that brings me to my next point. Because with climate change, as the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central spoke about, what we are seeing is greater volumes of water in a short amount of time. Greater volumes in a short amount of time, which means that our current standards, as they now stand, to be able to take volumes, are now obsolete. There's a saying that the infrastructure of today was built for a climate that no longer exists. So what we have to do is to build new infrastructure with new standards for the climate that we are now seeing. And that's exactly what we've been able to do with the help of a consultant working with the government, and he's able to put together some ideas of standards, not only for house building, but also standards for roof design, culvert design, depth, width, ability for how the water would be slowed down based on the narrowing in certain areas and the widening in other areas to be able to take larger volumes of water. It's exactly what we did in Whole Town with USAID. When USAID was able to support the government of Barbados to be able to put larger stormwater drains into the Whole Town area. And you know how that came about? Because the then ambassador recognized that whenever he got through Whole Town and there was a little rain, the area would flood all the time. And we were able to get that done with the consultant for roof to reefs to get an improved Whole Town flood mitigation system in place. Is it perfect? No. Does it help? Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. And I can come back to the Whole Town because the member for Christchurch South spoke about some question about Whole Town, and I'm going to come back to that. But in addition, you have to understand, flood mitigation is not only in the area that it floods. Flood mitigation also occurs upstream. And what the ministry was able to do as well is to build check dams, which is catching the water upstream before it gets into the flood area. And I think the ministry would have done about 10 or 15 check dams up in the St. Thomas area to be able to hold back water before it got into Whole Town. So it is a multifactorial thing to be able to control water and flooding. Nothing to talk about when you have areas that are coastal, because flooding also can appear coastal, but it comes now not from capturing water upstream, but from the fact that when you try to dig a well in a coastal area, you have a high water table. So it means that you hit water very, very quickly. The Honourable Member for Christchurch South, well, he may or may not know, but Dover's flooding is because of a high water table. So the problems that you see in Dover all the time is not only the fact that water isn't being captured upstream, but it's the fact that when they try to put a well in the Dover area, within, I would say, 4 to 6 feet, you hit water. So therefore, the wells that they do have there tend to be very shallow. So they cannot take enough water. And I'm going to come on to another point about that, and the concept of placing wells. You know, when I was a very new MP, in my exuberance to help the people of my constituency, I met with the then MTW, I met with drainage and so on, and we had a flooding problem in the Rockley area. And I, together with MTW, and those people, we were able to identify with the landowner's permission, because this now gives opportunity without landowner's permission, but with landowner's permission, to place a well. I can remember the man's name now, Mr. DeVerte, place a well on his land because we were getting a lot of flooding in this area. And I thought, right, good, that has solved the problem, and it did, and it worked for a while. But then, lo and behold, the Barbados Water Authority decides to put mains in the area, and they redid the road. When they redid the road, Mr. Speaker, it changed the flow of the water. And there's another thing that we need to look at and understand, that sometimes redesigning or rebuilding a road can change the flow of the water. And the well that was working so successfully was not getting any water anymore because the water was now pooling in advance of this well. So then we had to go and build another well to be able to catch that water. And then the concept of how much water and how long does it take for that water to dissipate. Many times as I pass the area, I have to get out and go and move the plastic bag and so on because the well is not flowing, the water is not flowing enough for to do what it's supposed to do, to take the water off the road for that well. And it brings me to another point, you know, another story. You may have heard of a man called Sir Charles Williams. No, the late Sir Charles. Sir Charles often reminded me of a story. He told me this story. He said when he was a young man in the construction industry, his job was to go and check wells. And he said, what do you mean by check wells, Sir Charles? I don't understand. He said, I mean, I can imagine, you know, when you go to build a well, it's a 4x4 wide or 4x6 or whatever it is. He says, yes. But you know, when the men dig in the well, it might be 4x6 at the top, but it might be 2x2 at the bottom. Because the quantum of the space, they reduce. And in fact, he told me a story of one time he went in a well to check it. And the well digger didn't like that he was going in the well. When he got in the well, luckily he had a second up top because the well digger had a boulder to drop down in that well. And luckily the second stopped the man from trotting that boulder down in that well. And he said if his second wasn't up top, he probably would have been a dead person if that boulder gone down. Because you got to remember, at that time, well, probably still now, people are paid according to the volume of material that they've taken out of a well. So the 4x4 or the 4x6 is supposed to be 4x4 or 4x6 at the top and at the bottom. And that was his job, to go and check the depth of the well to make sure that the depth remained the same all the way through the volume of material that was taken out. You know, this, Mr. Speaker, essentially codifies what the planning department has already been doing. And if nothing else, I think what this legislation does is it shows a little bit about how the planning department works. The planning department does not have all the information in itself residing. What the planning department does is it gathers from the technical people of each particular area what the particular problem is and how it resolves it. So from MTW, it does drainage and it does road design. From agriculture, it does the accessibility in the agriculture area. From coastal zone management, it gets the information about coastal, and then it brings all these technical people together to be able to collate and make decisions based on their comments and their responses to various applications. And I want to be clear, the planning department has been putting conditions on developers and developments all the time to be able to manage stormwater. And I'm going to go particularly to the application that the member for Christchurch South spoke about, which is the application for the new Civic Center at Trents. And it clearly states, so there's no question about being caught, not being caught. It is a condition. And you will not get certificate of compliance without complying to the conditions that are in. At condition 11, it says that the developer must give a detailed drainage plan showing how stormwater will be site contained. And the plan shall be based on accommodating a 50-year storm event. So there's no concept of who's getting caught in legislation or who's not getting caught in legislation, because the planning department has been putting this in conditions for a long, long time. And the particular development will not get a certificate of compliance unless they comply with all the agreed conditions. So this is standard. All this does, all the legislation now doing, is codifying what planning has been doing for a long time. So in addition, to get back to another floodplain that we did, another area that used to flood all the time was Cherry Tree Circle, Grove Circle, which was in the Wharton area. And then we had such great success at Chapman Lane, Mason Hall Street area. We then did another floodplain in Cherry Tree. And Cherry Tree now, you hardly hear flooding, because what we did is we went behind Water Street School and we did another floodplain, which takes the water as it comes down from the hill, captures it so it doesn't go into these lower areas like Cherry Tree in the Wharton area. So there are multiple factors that go into resolving drainage. And what the legislation is able to do is be able to pull all of these parts together and bring it into one place and make it clear to all and sundry that they're responsibilities of government, they're responsibilities of developers, they're responsibilities of homeowners. And what we have to do is work together collectively so that all the surrounding stakeholders and all the surrounding partners know full well that they're protected. This is a different world that we are living in. This is a world where we are seeing more storms, we are seeing more weather events, we are seeing more difficulties. And what we have to do as a government is to protect everybody, recognizing that it is absolutely important that the government plays its part. And I'm going to give a little something about the government, because the government has thousands of wells too. And those thousands of wells got to be maintained too. And it is important because it cannot only be, and I see the last part of it, it binds the government. And it has to be clear that the government itself has to maintain its own wells. You know, there was a time, Mr. Speaker, when on all the plantations, they used to have these wells. And those wells were integral, because not only were those wells stopping flooding in the plantation and in the plantation fields, but they were also helping to replenish the aquifers as well. But what has happened over time, those wells have fallen into disrepair, and I think the people who are given, they're given a small stipend, very small, to be able to maintain those wells. We need to get back to that. We need, and this is part of what this legislation is going to do as well, get those people that have wells on their plantations. And we had a program where we geotagged all the wells. I don't know if it's still going, but we geotagged, had a georeference for as many of the wells on the plantation. I think there were 4,000 or 5,000, thousands of them were all through the plantations lands in Barbados. A lot of them, when we inspected them, they were full of rubbish. They were full of vines and all sorts of overgrowth and debris and all sorts of things had gotten in them, which had stopped them from acting that the way they were supposed to act and contributing to the scarcity of water. So it was definitely important that we bring this so that we get people to understand that they have to maintain their wells. It is a civic responsibility to maintain those wells, because the more wells that you have operating in the agriculture area, the less water we have to deal with down the road. The less flood mitigation we have to deal with down the road. So this is very, very important legislation. It is timely. I commend this chamber to support this legislation, because I have, and not only the fact that there's been no contention about it, but this legislation is a legislation for Barbados. It is legislation for our environment. It is a legislation for the times. And what we must now do is step up to the plate and give Barbados the best, and it's due. I'm obliged.
Honourable for Christchurch East.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak very, very briefly. And I can't not speak because we're coming into that time of the year that causes me many, many sleepless nights, great anxiety. Sir, we are approaching the hurricane season, and for those who have been paying attention, while the hurricane season officially starts on the 1st of June, our position for operational readiness in Barbados is now the 1st of May. And the practical impact of that was felt last year when we had some of the earliest storms on record. We had the earliest Category 5 storm developing on record. And we were in a good position in terms of preparation for the event. We got some rain. It was not as much as we expected, but even though it was not as much as was expected, the fact was that we now have a program. We now have triggers, so we have protocols. So when a system is identified as coming in our direction, a certain distance out, then we trigger our protocols. You will see the Ministry of Public Works out clearing gullies, clearing waterways. We do the clearing of waterways up to 24 hours before the event. Another protocol that if people pay attention, they realize that within 12 hours of the shutdown, all the garbage in Barbados is collected. So that there's no garbage out in the street to be tossed around or to end up in the drains. We ensure that in the Bridgetown area, the sewage system and the stormwater network is flushed out. So these are things that, if people are actually watching what is going on, are triggered once the system is approaching Barbados. So we do have the protocols in place, and we do have the plans, and we do have the manpower and whatnot. But quite frankly, sir, while we do have that, we don't want the job to be difficult every single time. And the Honourable for Christchurch West was alluding to the pumps and the pump house down Fontebelle, down Princess Alice. A couple of years ago, we had flooding, massive flooding in Fontebelle, Murphy's Pasture, surrounding areas. And we took a tour to see exactly what's going on. And one of the places we visited was the pump house. And just before the pump house, there's a catchment area right in the car park of Chafet. It's like a grate that catches debris before it goes into the pump house. And there was supposed to be a man there raking that off. So when we looked in, sir, it was blocked up with all the bottles and plastic bags and things that came down. All Fontebelle was flooding out, right? And then there were 3 pumps that were there that kicking automatically, and then there was a massive pump that a key had to be turned. You had to manually turn that pump on. And the person to turn that pump on was nowhere to be found. So we had a double whammy. We had nobody there pulling off the debris from the filters, and we had nobody to switch on the pump. And we immediately got some persons down to clear off the filters, clear off the grates, and somebody was found to turn on the pump. And within an hour, that flooding that was all through by Kensington, all through by Murphy Pasture, literally Fontebelle was underwater. Within an hour, you could watch as the water started to recede. The best protocols, the best plans, sir, are only as good as the persons who are required to activate those plans. And while we may have the person who's designated to scrape the bottles out and scrape the plastic out to allow the water to flow, right? And while we do have the person who's supposed to turn on the pump, I think that's now completely automated now, right? The fact is we all have to do our part in ensuring that we stop dumping our refuse in and around Barbados casually. It annoys me no end when I see people throw something out of a van or a car. You can't hold your own garbage. You've eaten what it was that you were eating. I don't want to call the name of a fast food establishment, but there's a particular fast food establishment, I do not know where it is, that their stuff is always thrown out the window. But you've eaten, and you can't hold that plastic bag, you can't hold that box, you can't hold that cup till you get home and throw it in the garbage and allow it to go through the normal processes. Sir, if I use one of the areas that the Honourable, the opposition know as well, Goodland Gardens. There was flooding, badly. And you know what was causing all that flooding? A plastic bag had opened, big black plastic bag, and it has stuck itself onto the grate. Stuck itself onto the grate. No water could pass. The pressure of the water kept it in place. No water could pass. And it was simply a matter of moving the plastic bag. All out there was flooded. You could not pass. The fire service was called to pump off water, and then somebody thought they were going to check the grate, and there was one plastic bag blocking the water from going where it was supposed to go. Things as simple as that can cause somebody to lose all the stuff in their house. Can cause a house fire when the electric short out because the basement or the ground floor is flooded. This stormwater management plan, sir, is critical because it contemplates literally everything from permission to construction to management of developments to managing your property to littering to dumping things in waterways. And we should not have to get there because a lot of it is common sense. A lot of it is common sense. When a hurricane is coming, sir, Bajans do the right thing. When a hurricane, any day before the hurricane, you see people knowing the rain is coming. They're going to clean up outside the yard. And we actually tell people this is what you need to do in the 24 hours before. People go and clean up outside the yards. They bring in the garbage. If the garbage is not collected, and for most times it is, people bring it in. People do everything when the system is impending, when the system is about to hit us. We do what is right because we know if we don't do it, it is going to potentially affect exactly where we live. Why should we not do that all the time? All the time. The fact that we have to expend the resources that we do, sir, if you see the amount of stuff that gets taken out, it drains in and around Bridgetown in the 24 hours before a storm, it shouldn't be there. We shouldn't have to do it every single time, every single time. That one plastic bag you throw, that one bottle you throw will add to the other bottles and the other plastic bags that other people throw and perhaps cause somebody to lose everything. We are coming now to that time of the year. I'm asking, in the same way that the government has taken a position for us to be proactive and to recognize the reality of where we are, then we also need Barbadians to recognize the reality of where we are. The rains are coming a lot faster. The notice is often a lot less. When Beryl was approaching Barbados, sir, there was a point in time when we couldn't say year on year. It took a dip. It took 2 jogs and missed Barbados. But just as easily, it could have taken 2 jogs in the other direction and hit us fully. It is becoming a lot more difficult to predict the weather and the impacts of the weather. So to make the job easier for those who have to pull out all the stops in the 24 to 48 hours before a system, to make the job easier for the Ministry of Public Works that has to divert resources to do things that if we operate ourselves in a way we know is responsible, they would not have to do. That they have to deflect manpower from where they need to have it most to do simple things like pulling bottles out of drains to save Bridgetown. If we do the things that we have to do, then we make life easier for many. The works that have been done on the West Coast, whole town used to flood. If God cried, the whole town flooded. It was bad. It is not so bad now, and that's not by happenstance. That is because the waterways have been cleared and they're kept clear. That is because programs are in place to address when we know the weather is coming. We have done as much as we can do. And we do it every single time a system approaches. But Barbadians need to play their part as well. This is not about me chastising people. This is about me making a plea. We have a lot to do in those final hours before a system approaches Barbados. I'm asking Barbadians to do what they have to do from early o'clock so we can make the best use of our time to save persons, to save communities, and to save lives. I am glad, sir, to see the efforts of the Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast in bringing this to Parliament. We should not have to get this granular in order to do the things that we need to do to protect our country. But we've laid it all out. Persons, I urge people to read the bill. Read the bill. Know where your responsibilities lay. Know what it is you're expected to do. Know what it is that the government is asking of you to do, not for our benefit, but to protect yourselves. We have gotten granular. If you read it, and it is in pretty simple language, if you read it, you will know what the considerations are that informed it, and you will know how best to act to preserve Barbados. I highly commend this piece of legislation, and I thank and congratulate the Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast for bringing it to us just before the high winds come, bringing it to us just before the rains come. Let us help you to help us to make life easier and more secure for Barbados. The hurricane season is upon us. We know what we have to do. Let us do it. Thank you, sir.
Honourable Member for St. Lucie.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this legislation as the representative of a rural constituency. And I'm quick to make that comment as I heard my colleagues speaking in terms of what transpires at time in the urban areas. And I can understand why in that respect, but the challenge is equal or even more important in rural constituencies. One of the things as I sat there that I remember, my mother used to say to me, Honourable Member for Christchurch West, as a boy, 3 things you can't control: wind, fire, and water. But because you cannot do that, particularly with respect to the water, you have to put mitigating measures in place to reduce any kind of damage and so on, which you could get possibly from overflow and excessive rainfall and such like. I had the honor to serve in my first 5 years as a minister within the Ministry of Transport and Works, where my colleague who brought this wonderful piece of legislation now sit. I understand the challenges, therefore I understand the importance of this piece of legislation, not just as the representative of a rural constituency, but having sat in the ministry and having done several tours and seen a lot of what takes place, perhaps on a daily basis with persons in terms of dumping of garbage and such like. As a government, we have to take decisive action. If we don't take decisive action today, we will pay for it tomorrow. We must be proactive in the cleaning and clearing of our watercourses. We must have an annual program for such. I do not recall, since I served in that ministry, I do not recall of a program in St. Lucie, I speak of, where water courses have been cleared. And this is something that we have to, as a government. I have the file or copies of all the information which shows where all my water courses are, because I took the opportunity in that ministry to copy them, to keep reminding me of the programs that we used to do, and of course, and to keep urging the ministry that there are some things that you put new things in place, but there are some simple things that you just do. We have water courses in areas like Derms and Pickering and Allendale, Chancel, Grenadines. Every time there's excessive rain, as a matter of fact, and I must regrettably say, unfortunately, we lost a youngster in 2020. None of us could do anything to replace that youngster, who served St. Lucie as an ambassador just only the year in front, lost his life, regrettably. And this tells me of the extreme importance to making sure that we put measures and keep measures in place. One of the things that I would suggest, now, our gullies are full of too much bush. Gullies, water courses, too much bush. And we have to put measures in place from as early as now. We must have a program where every year, when I served in the ministry, it used to start in May, before the hurricane season. But with climate change, a lot indeed has changed, and we need to change our actions. Not to be reactive, but to be proactive, and do it in a timely manner so that we are not rushed and that it can be done properly. That is absolutely important. I want to say to persons who live in those areas as well, when I was in that ministry, on every tour that we took to these gullies, around to these gullies and different areas, we urged, I remember specifically, it was like a recitation. You're saying the same thing over and over and over again, telling persons not to dump their waste, bulk waste or otherwise, not to dump the bulk waste in the gullies. If you do that today, it can come back to bite you tomorrow. I have had the opportunity on some occasions to watch persons, sometimes persons not from that community, that immediate community, but from other communities coming in, scoping the place at evening time and coming back at night, and sometimes even in broad daylight as you're driving through what you call the lonesome roads. You see trucks coming through with old fridge, old stove. Every time you see them reversing to dump the garbage. And when you do that, when there's heavy rainfall, that garbage blocks the flow of water and sends it in a different direction altogether. Sends it in a different direction altogether. I am glad that we have the legislation to deal with this illegal dumping. There is and we have to pay attention to construction. There's a place in St. Lucie a road called Husband's Road. I don't know for the life of me what happens. Every time the rain falls at the top of the road, close to Content, and at the bottom of the road, near to Friendly Hall Development, near to Maycott's Terrace, there's always flooding because the water, quite the example that the Honourable Member for Christchurch East gave, the bikes come down and cover the grills, therefore blocking, and this is right by a storm well. So the water cannot get into the well. At the top of Husband's Road near to Content, the water in a flash mounts up. And very often, vehicles are trapped there, cannot get through. Community cut off. And therefore, we have to look and continue to look and put measures in place where this is concerned. We must not be, as people, we should not be the victim of our own bad practices. And they would want to urge us, everyone, to do the right thing. Do the right thing. Because very often, you know, you ever check that when hurricanes and bad weather hit, it is usually at night. You know, it's usually at night, not in broad daylight where you can see where you're going and how to maneuver and such like. Very often it is at night. And you can't get out to help anybody because you yourself might be trapped where you are. And this legislation that is brought before this House today speaks volumes of how we are planning and we are being proactive as a government, because we cannot control, we can't tell the rain when to fall, nor the sun when to shine. Already at this time of the year, early in the year, we have had some bad weather in terms of rainfall. And we therefore we can see that it's not just a talk of climate change and such like, but it is real. We see it happening. We see our communities across this country being affected from time to time. And if you have no control over the weather, control the thing which you can control. That is your disposal of the garbage and such like that may be accumulated, whether it is at a business place or whether it is at your house. Control that. I remember, I also see, Mr. Speaker, we had what we were called surprise. Perhaps it might have taken us by surprise. I'm glad that the Honourable Member for Christchurch East spoke of the measures that they have put in place and how you can spot things early. But as early as you may be able to spot things, Honourable Member, we still could not control the storm surge we had the last year in June, July. We still could not control that and the damage that it has done. It licked up the beach at Clinkates and Sherman's. And tomorrow I have the opportunity to meet with someone from Coastal to discuss and to understand the plans from the brief conversation that we had. I like the sound of the plans. And you know, they have some person from the other side. I believe the Honourable Member for Christchurch South set them up for this. Walking around taking pictures of everything. But that's all they do. Never correct it, never made an effort to correct anything when they control the constituency for 24 long years. And I'm going to talk about that. But having come in, based on what the people wanted having come in, I intend that as long as it takes, I am going to do my best in my representation to lead a legacy of proper representation and projects which we have done to correct all the ills that there is in the only female parish in in Barbados. That is what I am here to do, to represent. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. I ain't getting in the departure lounge till I've seen a number of projects completed. Because it is about improvement for the people you serve, not about talk. Not about talk, but improvement. And the government has, as long as I've been there, been doing a number of projects, doing its best to assist in that regard. And this legislation is part of that process. It shows you that this government is serious about not just talk, not pretty talk like the other side, as they would always quote. Not pretty talk and action like you're from Hollywood, but about doing things to uplift the constituency and then ready to go on the front foot. I would challenge the opposition leader and whoever he brings to put the records, and we will put the records straight. Put your record straight. I'm going to put mine straight. And the record of this government. That is why I don't mind that idle talk. Don't mind that idle talk. That's a fiction of your imagination. I know you're lonely. But as long as I serve in this honorable house, I intend to work on the behalf of the people of St. Lucie, work with the government. That doesn't rush in to think of fools rush in. That's what the word says, fools rush in. Where angels fail to tread, you're an angel. So, Mr. Speaker, I could only support wholeheartedly this legislation with all that has happened and all the pieces of legislation that we have put on the statute books. And we want to not just put the legislation there, but make the legislation work for us and for the people we serve. And I therefore have no choice. And I know I will have other opportunity to talk about other things which this government has been doing, not just in my constituency, but in the rest of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable St. Michael's Office.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't expect this bill to lead us to this point where there was so much humor at the end, because I really want to, first of all, thank all of the honourable members who spoke. I particularly enjoyed the last speaker, the honourable member for St. Lucie. And perhaps I should indicate to the member for Christchurch South that he can be assured that he will get to his 6 o'clock urgent meeting of all members of the Democratic Labour Party. We have no intention of detaining him. We are certainly ready on this side for whatever the future holds. And while he is looking forward to company next to him, we intend to continue to maintain this government and keep this country in good order. That said, though, Mr. Speaker, you know, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition...
Today is African Liberation Day. Because I remember you are a member for Christchurch, so I was speaking to liberations. I didn't know that it was African Liberation Day. Oh, I see.
I heard him, Mr. Speaker, but it's going to take a lot more than liberation to help him and his party. And I hope that nobody gets locked out this afternoon at George Street. But I want to, in all sincerity, all jokes aside, I want to thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. I think maybe by indicating to him that there was previously no opposition from the then Democratic Labour Party may have soothed him somewhat and given him the comfort that if he went against that, he would be going against the heart of the Democratic Labour Party as well. But I think this, and you've heard the other members spoke, this is not an issue where there is a lot of contention, if any. As usual, and perhaps in a very predictable way. I know the Honourable Member for Christchurch South is concerned that he's now become very predictable. But I sit here quietly, Mr. Speaker, and I watch and I listen very carefully to the Leader of the Opposition, and he is predictable. I don't get concerned about the antics and the criticisms and all that, but he is predictable. If there's a piece of legislation that is sound, for the most part, the Honourable Member will support. He will make the usual comments about the presentation by the Honourable Member, and he will dive straight into the law. And that has been the usual trajectory. So in anticipating and certainly in preparing this bill and going back through the amendments that we've made, I think it was clear that there could be little opposition on the foundation principles of the bill, and perhaps that there would be some things that he would raise in relation to the law. Allow me first, though, to let him know that there is no coincidence whatsoever with this particular legislation coming today. I think he was concerned that when I mentioned Western and what happened in St. James North many years ago, that this was somehow coinciding with the resignation of the Honourable Member for St. James North. But I wish to alert him that the bill was actually on the order paper for some time, and we did some amendments to it. Again, anticipating his criticisms, we tried to fine-tune it as much as we could to limit those criticisms, but to get it right, because we do benefit from members and their contributions in this chamber to make sure that the legislation is tight. So again, I just want to thank him for that. He raised, obviously, a few issues. You mentioned the wetlands in Dover to be clean. That, along with the area in Graham Hall and others, obviously we have a routine maintenance schedule ongoing. The Honourable Member for St. Lucie raised some areas which he indicated in his constituency need to be back into the program, and certainly I will look at that. I know that some of them have been done, but we certainly, once the monies are released for this financial year, we will start that program again. I know you tried to throw a spoke in the wheel with the whole town issue with Trents, but just to say to the Honourable Member that drainage unit, and certainly this ministry, has been doing a lot of cleanup from the last administration. And in so doing, there are a lot of drainage studies, a lot of flood engineering studies that I've certainly come to office, and we've had to aggressively try to ensure that we engage the relevant individuals, professionals, to be able to carry out flood engineering works. So I just want to assure him, he raised the issue of whether Trents is going to be addressed in terms of drainage issues. I give him the assurance that Trents is actually being addressed because when we move the Civic Center into that area, not only will the drainage study address the move and the relocation of the Civic Center, but we have also addressed the wider issue of drainage in the area. So whatever impacts that particular facility may have, we have looked at all of the issues of flooding in the surrounding areas as well. Obviously, we have gone further because he didn't mention it today, but the member for Christchurch South should be aware, and if he isn't, the current caretaker of the constituency is well aware of the issues in Hythe Gardens, because he did not mention it. But having met with the residents there and our caretaker for that constituency, we have gone in, we have looked at the issues that have presented the individuals in that community, and we've given certain assurances in terms of how we are going to address that area. The flood engineering studies have extended, I think I mentioned earlier, to Wilcox. They've extended to Goodland Gardens, which I believe is also in his constituency. Again, that has been a long-standing problem. Finally, we have those studies that are ongoing. We should get those very shortly, and then we should be able to go to tender to be able to get the works actually completed in those areas. Pillersdorf, Martindale's Road, Ashdean Village, and then we also included the Dover area, or what we call the wider Dover area. And we went even further because I know he will know that I have a familiarity in St. Lawrence Gap and the outskirts of St. Lawrence Gap. But the area that has been of concern for us, certainly people who have lived in the area, people who traverse the area, he would be aware that when there are heavy rains, there's a settlement of water along the Southern Palms area, just in front of Southern Palms Hotel. And we often see both the tourists and the locals having to jump over water, you know, quite frequently in that area. So just to give the assurance that we extended the flood engineering designs beyond the wider Dover area into the avenues, and we have also taken into account that particular location at the end of St. Lawrence Gap. The Honourable Member for Christchurch South also raised an issue. I think he was expecting the Attorney General to respond on whether the legislation is retroactive. A little bit of tongue-in-cheek, because I'm sure that he knows better. So I will quite simply say, no, the legislation is not retroactive. That has not been the intention. There's been no discussion in relation to that. What we are focused on is carving out a way forward, a way that basically sends the signal that we are perhaps more serious than we've ever been about dealing with the issues of climate change and strengthening the powers, certainly, of the drainage unit. And of course, any concerns with respect to existing developers, I believe the Honourable Member for Christchurch West would have addressed that in relation to the ongoing discussions that developers have from time to time with the Planning Department. And I'm sure that they will address any concerns that arise in the course of any development, whether Old Town or anywhere else for that matter. The other concern that I believe was raised that I would just want to touch on is I think there was this inference that Section 19 criminalizes behavior of individuals, whereas with respect to land developers that we are, in a sense, soft on land developers. Sorry, that Section 17 does not do the same thing as it does in relation to Section 19 in relation to individuals. And that for some reason we are being soft on land developers where there is no similar penalty and offense being created in relation to, for instance, the submission of stormwater drainage plans. I would want to address this as follows. I think it is, I understand the need to sensationalize these issues and to make it appear as though there's one rule for one and one rule for the next. But if the Honourable Member would cast his mind back to some planning law, he would realize that any developer who intends to do development in this country has to go through a process. There are a set of rules and regulations in place, and really, as the Honourable Minister and Senior Minister for Christchurch West would have indicated, what we have sought to do in this legislation is to codify what already exists. We've not created anything new in relation to that section. But if he goes to Section 18, he will see that the offense is actually created in relation to the land developers where they haven't failed, or if asked to submit a stormwater drainage plan, if they fail to do so once requested, that if they go on to construct a system and it is the inappropriate system, it creates an offense under the legislation. So it speaks to the fact that the land developer shall, if required to do so by the Chief Technical Officer or the Director of Planning and Development, construct adequate drainage systems to mitigate the risk of flooding within the development. So again, once he has gone through the submission of the stormwater plans, if requested to do so by the Director of Planning and Development, if he then does not obviously comply with the requirements to do so and they're not adequate, the legislation at Section 18 provides that that will now constitute an offense and the person will be guilty of an offense and liable on summary conviction to a fine of $20,000. So I believe that should settle the issue as to whether there is any attempt in the legislation to distinguish between individuals and owners, the ordinary man, as he's trying to put it, or against versus the land developer. And quite simply, there is no intention to distinguish. We are going after them with two different regimes, but this legislation certainly does not allow them to construct anything that goes against the drainage system infrastructure that is required by town and country planning, right? I think, Mr. Speaker, I think those were some of the main issues that have been raised. I agree with the honourable member for Christchurch East in relation to our preparations for the upcoming hurricane season. And perhaps at every opportunity, I think we need to remind Barbadians that we are in this together, and therefore that any precautions that they're going to do 24 hours before a system, they need to do to start from now to be able to do the necessary planning in their households. As it relates to, and I agree with the support given by the member, Senior Minister for Christchurch West, because he set out clearly the role of the planning department, the way in which the approaches are taken to land developers. Obviously, his extensive knowledge as a former minister as well has been borne out here today in support of the bill. And I think all other honourable members who have in some way interfaced with either the ministry or interface with the concerns. The Minister for the Environment as well, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central. Again, this debate I don't think could go ahead without him, because he is certainly a pioneer in this area in terms of environmental issues. And again, we are mindful that whether it is at the Ministry of Drainage, whether it is in the Ministry of Environment, that collectively we all have a responsibility to protect the ecosystem in Barbados, and that is certainly what we're going to continue to do. Now, Mr. Speaker, I therefore want to bring this debate to an end. I think that we have been able today to be able to explain to the public the importance of stormwater management, to allow people to understand now that we are serious in terms of not only properly defining the system under which we must now operate, but that we are clear in terms of the rights and the responsibilities and the duties under the legislation for each of the various stakeholders. And I would hope that in the course of the next few weeks, once this bill has passed the other place, that we can get full steam ahead to starting the communications through both the Government Information Service and certainly the internal communications team in MTW, to be able to inform the public further of its rights, the rights and responsibilities of the respective stakeholders. So, Mr. Speaker, I think with those few words, I therefore beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that the bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of the bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This Honourable House is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, permission to call the bill in parts.
So granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 4.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 1, part 1 to 4 stand part. Part 1, clauses 1 to 4 stand.
The question is that part 1, clauses 1 to 4 stand part. All honourable members in favour, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 5 to 11.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that part 2, clause 5 to 16? 11, stand part.
The question is that part 2, clauses 5 to 11 stand part. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 12 to 16.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause, Part 3, Clause 12 to 16 stand.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 12 to 16 stand part. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 17 and 18.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 4, Part 4, Clause 17 and 18 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 17 to 18 stand part. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 19 to 22.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 5, Clauses 19 to 22 stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 19 to 22 stand part. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 23 to 28.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 6, Clauses 23 to 28 stand.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 23 to 28 stand part. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 29 to 36.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 7, Clauses 29 to 36 stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 29 to 36 stand part. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report the passing of, to this honor the speaker, the passing of one bill in committee. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
Question is that the bill be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be now passed and cited as a Stormwater Management Act 2025.
The question is that this bill be passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited.
Order number 11, sir. In the name of the Honorable Attorney General, to move the second reading of the Barbados National Honors and Decorations Amendment Bill 2025.
Honorable Member St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, a national honor is the award given to outstanding individuals for service to their fellow man and service to their country. I think it is fair to say that since coming to government, we have refocused the awarding of national honors And in that process, sir, we have created homegrown honors. Honors such as the Freedom of Barbados. These, sir, replace the royal honors, the imperial honors that we used to have before. We've debated those changes, and perhaps there's not much need to reflect on them further. But it is important to know, Mr. Speaker, and to acknowledge that as we try to find the best way to recognize outstanding individuals, outstanding members of our citizenry, we always have to look back at what we've been doing and where necessary tweak or transform the methods by which national honors are awarded. We today, sir, have large numbers of Barbadians who provided yeoman service to this country throughout COVID and in other circumstances, and they have all justly received the reward that consists of national recognition, that recognition that we bestow on them on behalf of a grateful nation. Today, though, sir, we have come to bring some order and transparency to another part of our recognition system. And that has to do, Mr. Speaker, with how we name our public places, how we name our public roads, and how we name our public buildings. You see, Mr. Speaker, these things are normally in the gift of the government. Some may say in the gift of the Prime Minister. It is to my certain knowledge, sir, that, and certainly I draw on my previous experience in cabinet, previous experience in the Senate and in Parliament, and I'm able to say, without fear of contradiction, that the scheme by which these places have been named have traditionally consisted of a recommendation being made to Cabinet that a particular road be named after somebody. Cabinet agrees, and then that is the end of that. A building, a recommendation comes in for a building. In fact, I can well recall the Fort Simmons complex on Coleridge Street. And I was very proud to be able to pilot through Cabinet the naming of that complex after two legal luminaries, one of whom is now of blessed memory, Sir Henry Ford. And that is how we've traditionally done things. So a recommendation goes to Cabinet, Cabinet agrees, and after that, it follows that the place or building is named. But the problem with that, sir, is that there is no transparency to it. There are no rules governing it. And the average citizen does not feel that he or she has any vested interest in what things are named after. So we would all have awakened one day and discovered that the highway was Adams Barrow Cummins, or that the airport is Grantley Adams Airport, and on it went for many years. We have taken the view, sir, that when it comes to matters of national prominence, when it comes to matters of national honors, that there be a structure and that it should not be like equity, sir. You well recollect the saying that equity was as long or as short as the Chancellor's foot. So depending on what mood the Chancellor was in on any given day, you got what output he produced. There's also the risk, and I believe we've not had a contentious situation in Barbados, but there's also the risk, sir, of a public place, building, or space being named, and then a subsequent cabinet coming in and saying, we changing that because we, for whatever reason, they may find appropriate. And where you don't have a structure, where you don't have a legislative accord, you expose yourself, Mr. Speaker, to that inglorious prospect. As I said, to my knowledge, we've not had it happen before, but there are a lot of things that in a previous government had never happened before that we saw happen. So the context, therefore, Mr. Speaker, is one where it is important for the state to recognize its citizens not just by giving them a personal honor, something that they put before their name, or something that brings with it post-nominal letters. That's a personal honor and deserved. But there's also the importance, Mr. Speaker, of national recognition of a contribution of an individual. And that's where naming places, or public places, public spaces, and public roads comes in. So we're moving away from the formal but not rules-based system and implementing a legislative foundation for the making of such awards. And so upon the passage of this legislation, Mr. Speaker, no more will you have a situation where Cabinet says, we want to name that building after so-and-so, we want to name that road after so-and-so. That will become a thing of the past, sir. And it is important that we take this step because national honors, while they are personal things, national honors belong to all of us because they represent the high regard and the acclamation that we give to Barbadians and sometimes non-Barbadians, because you can think of the area holder complex in St. Joseph. The regard with which we hold these individuals and therefore consider them to be deserving of national honors. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, today we look to implement a new system where the committee that makes the decision on whether a person gets the freedom of Barbados or whatever national honor they would get, that committee will also be responsible for receiving nominations for the names of places and so on, and taking those things into account, make a recommendation for the naming of any of those facilities. This means, Mr. Speaker, that the average Barbadian is able to contemplate for a moment, you know, in my parish, I feel that we should name this particular roundabout, this particular road, this particular alley, this building, this public facility after somebody who has made a contribution. And therefore, by putting this system in place, we are giving the public an opportunity to participate in perhaps what is the most solemn duty of any generation, and that is how we choose to venerate the individuals in our society or those individuals who have gone before. Mr. Speaker, this is not I hope it is not contentious, because I think that any time that you move away from a purely subjective thing into a more structured and transparent set of arrangements, I like to think, Mr. Speaker, that any reasonable person would acknowledge that that is a significant change to how we do things, and they would equally acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, the benefits that would come from making such a change. So that this amendment, the amendment to the National Honors and Decorations Act of 2021, will make provision for the Advisory Council to make recommendations to the Prime Minister to name or rename a public building, a public road, or a public space after a person as a national honor, and that they shall take into account the following things. So this advisory committee, Mr. Speaker, has to take into account whether or not that individual has made a notable contribution to the history and development of the community or parish or existence of Barbados as a nation, or whether that individual has pioneered or made exemplary achievements in any discipline, including but not limited to administration, business, politics, education, science, sports, or literature, or, apart from that, achieve prominence in their particular field. And those are the things that they can consider, but there also is another limb which says that you can also consider any other factor that the advisory council may consider appropriate. So an individual, a recommendation will be made to the advisory council takes into account the contribution, and then it can go forward and make a recommendation to the Prime Minister under the particular provision for the awarding of the honor. We've also sought to tidy up a few things, Mr. Speaker. We are going to be providing in this legislation that the Prime Minister may confer any honor or decoration upon this act, under this act, upon the dissolution of Parliament, upon notice to the President of the resignation of the Prime Minister, where there are exceptional national circumstances where a person may have contributed to the national interest, safety, or well-being of the people of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, the arrangement as it stands now is that there are limits to the number of awards, national honors that can be given, and it is important because you don't want to dilute it. But there are occasions when a Prime Minister may want to nominate certain individuals, and there's precedent for this. In the UK, what is called the mother of all parliaments, their Prime Minister is able, upon demitting office, to bestow national honors, knighthoods, or other honors on individuals in that person's discretion. Certainly in the United States, a similar thing obtains. And we feel, Mr. Speaker, that Barbados is now a mature enough country with mature enough political leadership to be able to say that this is an approach that we will adopt, so that a Prime Minister, either upon demitting office, may, as you may say as a parting gift, make an award to somebody who has made a significant contribution. So, as I said, there's precedent for this. But we can take into account extraordinary national circumstances, such as whether a person has performed in an outstanding way in a national disaster or a national emergency, or whether a person has made a major international achievement where our reputation as a country is significantly advanced, and there are people who immediately come to mind for that. There is also a further set of amendments that we want to make in respect of the Order of Freedom of Barbados. We are proposing, Mr. Speaker, and again we are following precedent that happens all across the world, that the Order of Freedom of Barbados, our highest national honor, would be conferred on each Prime Minister upon the completion of his first term of office. But it is important for us to make this clear, because I know that there are people whose brains will already be whirring, saying that this is the Prime Minister wanting to make an award to herself. Not so. Not so. Because the legislation, the bill says, this section, that is the section allowing for the conferment of the Freedom of Barbados honor, Freedom of Barbados medal on the Prime Minister. It says, this section shall not apply to the holder of the post of Prime Minister at the time of commencement of this section. So for those people who may want to think that this is our Prime Minister's way of of taking onto herself additional prominence as if she needed it, or causing to be bestowed upon herself our highest national honor, not so. And I can say that this matter has received the fullest airing in our cabinet, and the Prime Minister's views have been both strident and stubborn. Strident and stubborn. She says, this is not for me. I recognize, these are her, well, I'm paraphrasing, but the Prime Minister recognized that it is always an invidious thing when you pass a law which appears to allow you to benefit from it. And therefore, that hamstrings any Prime Minister. It hamstrings any decider, because they will say, I'm not going to do this, no matter how deserving it is, because there will be an appearance that I am doing it for myself. But this cabinet has been courageous enough to approve it, and this Prime Minister has been courageous enough to say this legislation is important for Barbados, but lest anyone think that I want it for myself, I want the statute to specifically exclude me holding the office of Prime Minister. I cannot think, Mr. Speaker, of other legislation like that. And you know, as an aside of a different kind, this Parliament, this government, has passed a number of legislative instruments which have seen the power of a Prime Minister being, I don't want to say eroded, but being willingly passed on to other people. You can think about the power to appoint judges. We now have a judicial selections committee that takes all of that burden off of the Prime Minister. And there are other instances. The appointment of a president. The appointment of the head of state in Barbados used to be in the gift of the Prime Minister. But we now have a legislative process which sets out how it is to be done, and it is no longer in the gift of the Prime Minister. So this approach is consistent with how the Prime Minister has been conducting herself in terms of national affairs. And I repeat, sir, this clause says, this section shall not apply to the holder of the post of Prime Minister at the time of commencement of this section. And therefore, we have to laud the Prime Minister for being generous enough minded to say, I feel this is important, but it is equally important for me to demonstrate to the country that this is not being done in my interest. Other amendments that we are making, Mr. Speaker, it is quite common across the world and across the region for the holders of certain high offices, which will only come as a result of them having distinguished themselves, should receive national honors. Happens in Jamaica, happens in Trinidad, happens in other places. And so we are providing in this amendment that the Chief of Staff of the Barbados Defense Force and the Commissioner of Police shall, as of right, be accorded the Order of the Republic upon taking office. Now, again, these are individuals who are both, in order to be there, you must have the highest personal standards. You must have distinguished yourself in your specific office. And you are leading the security services of the country. You're leading the security services of the country, and you really could not want a more honorable thing to do for an individual who has achieved the pinnacle of success in the law enforcement or military career. And therefore, This amendment, as I said, there's precedent for it across the region and across the world, and we think it is important that we recognize these individuals by virtue of their office. And upon the coming into force of this enactment, the Chief of Staff and the Commissioner of Police will be accorded, as of right, the Order of the Republic. Another consequential amendment, though it is small, and it relates to the order of the award of Pride of Barbados. Now, you would know, sir, that in 2019 we enacted the Pride of Barbados legislation so that we can begin to make national honors and to recognize individuals based on the parish that they are from. The law as it stands now says each parish gets 10 awards. Each parish. But, Mr. Speaker, when you look at the voters list for St. Joseph, you will see about 7,600 voters. That's 7,600 adults. By the time you work out the children, if you want, the minors, if you want to add those, you might get to 20,000, 21,000 people. And so 10 awards for us is fine. But, Mr. Speaker, the parish of St. Michael has 120,000 people living in it. 120,000 people living in it. I know the number because that is the number of people that we have to police in the St. Michael area. 120,000 people. And therefore, to say to the parish of St. Michael that you can only get the same number of awards as the parish of St. Andrew, the parish of even St. Lucie, which I believe is jostling with St. Joseph for being the smallest parish in the island in terms of population, not in terms of beauty. We win that hands down. But it is obviously not fair that with the largest population base, you should have the same number of awards. And similarly, Christchurch and St. Philip, the largest growing parish in Barbados. I think they have now, there must be near 40,000 plus people by now. So remember, these are not constituencies that we're talking about, they are parishes. And therefore, we feel that it is important that we remove that limitation of 10 or modify that limitation of 10 persons per parish simply because it does not reflect the geographical distribution in the country. It simply does not. And therefore, we have to figure out how we're going to do it. There's something called a Henry VIII clause. And this is just a little piece of legal trivia for drafting. But Henry VIII was known to rule his kingdom not so much by legislation, but by the making of orders. So quite facetiously, whenever you have in legislation a power to make an order such that it will in fact amend the legislation, it is called a Henry VIII clause. And so because of the difficulty in dealing with parishes, given the demand for the award, the number of recommendations, all of which are going to be unknown at this point in time, we've made the provision that the number of awards which can be given, the number of Pride of Barbados awards, that the minister may by order amend the number of persons who may get the award at any given time. So we don't have to go to a strict mathematical formula and say each parish is 10, obviously unfair. And we don't need to say St. Michael will get 50 or will get 100. We don't need to do that. From time to time, the minister responsible will be able, by order, to say the parish of St. Michael will get, let's say, 30. In another year, depending on the circumstances, depending on what has happened, the minister responsible may say, in this year, on this occasion, the number of awards will be 100. Or they can bring it down to 10. And this applies really to every parish, because there may be a parish in on a particular occasion that might have 30 recommendations. Again, we're not trying to dilute it, but we want to make sure that it works, and we want to make sure that individuals are not shut out purely because of a number, purely because a parliament has set an artificial cutoff point. And rather than allow that to persist, we are going to allow the minister by order to make changes to the number of awards that will be given in any parish at any given time. 10 may suffice, in which case they may leave it at 10. But as I said, in a very short period of time, we're going to have to be asking ourselves, how many parish awards are we going to give to St. Michael? Mr. Speaker, if you only get 10 and you got 11 MPs, already somebody can get shut out. And the Prime Minister, as you can tell, is most generous, but I don't know if she would agree to sacrifice her gift on that occasion. So it may seem a small matter, but it can be of significant import, and we are therefore going to be making that consequential amendment to the Order of the Pride of Barbados Award. The Chief Justice, Mr. Speaker, will also receive the award by virtue of his office, the Order of the Freedom of Barbados, so that there are three offices, I should say, where the holders of those offices will receive the Order of Freedom of Barbados. And I've already mentioned the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Staff. The Chief Justice is now going to be added to this. You will recall, sir, that for all of pre-independence and post-independence, all of our Chief Justices were given the national recognition of a knighthood. This current Chief Justice has come to us as a republic, so there's no knighthood for him. I believe he got it already. I don't think he's got it yet. And therefore we don't have to put that in place. But we're saying that as of right, again, remember that the individual who is heading our judiciary is a person of utmost good integrity. And therefore, we feel it is important that the Order of Freedom of Barbados should be bestowed on him. But just to give a correction, the Order of the Republic will go to the Chief of Staff and the Commissioner, while the Order of Freedom of Barbados will be accorded to the Chief Justice. So, sir, those are the small amendments. I am sorry that I have delayed Parliament on this evening to go through it, but it is important that we deal with it. I think it is important, sir, that we put proper, transparent rules in place for naming of our public buildings, and I have to say, sir, that it is something that we have not paid enough attention to. It is one way of honoring individuals. An individual who receives a personal honor, that dies with him. That dies with him. In memory, he will always be Sir this or Sir that or the most honorable, but the honor dies with him. But when we name a public space, a public building, that is so named for all generations. And we need to put a better system in place. So, sir, those are the matters that we are addressing now. And I beg to move, therefore, that this bill be read a second time.
Beg second.
Honourable, grace yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You will forgive my fairly obvious amusement at this matter. And I was amused at two things that I observed. First, I became highly amused at how the Honourable Member for St. Joseph and the Learned Attorney General so reveled in this debate. Let's call it a debate. I was very amused at that. And secondly, if they don't mind me saying it, the obvious boredom and disinterest of the two West Central representatives, Christchurch West Central and St. Michael West Central, while the Honourable Attorney General reveled in this debate, I glanced across and discovered that perhaps if they were not constituting a quorum, they would have preferred to be elsewhere. They were very, very disinterested and bored. Perhaps they will say otherwise. I don't think that is their normal appearance. They're far more handsome than they would have appeared this afternoon in this debate. But this question of awards, I don't know how seriously, and I don't mean to offend he who presented, but I don't know how seriously people are taking them these days. If a government rewards itself by painting everything in the country red, that is akin to government's system of rewards. And I say rewards because we always must make the distinction between an award and a reward. And to make the point clearer, an award is a bona fide acknowledgement or recognition of achievement. A reward is more in the nature of a compensation or even an enticement to find people's favor. And I'm wondering if we are not into the age of reward as opposed to award. And the government has to be careful that it is not losing credibility as it rides around the country like a horseman in search of favor, giving out or parceling out these rewards. I heard the Honourable Attorney General scratch his head and wonder, now how are we going to work this system if one parish has 8,000 people and St. Michael has 120,000 people? We have to come up with some kind of quota system. I would have thought that an honor is not dependent on a system of quotas, but that an honor is dependent on genuine achievement, so that if St. Joseph, for example, as they become more enlightened now, if there are 10 people up there who deserve an award, and there's one in St. Michael who deserves an award, give it based not on a quota system, but give it on the basis of merit. But as I said, if we're in the business of splashing red paint over every public space, then the government's credibility